Thanks for staying with us. The ailing economy and the rising cost of living continues to be a major concern. Some experts are warning the country is at risk of becoming a failed state. South Africa has been trending for the wrong reasons for some time now, with political leaders implicated in corruption and lives lost last year to the July unrest. This has caused concerns about the future of our country. To discuss this further, we are joined by Professor William Gumede from the Wits School of Governance, who joins us on Zoom, as well as Dr. Polzer Ngwato from the Social Survey Africa. Thank you so much both for your time. We do appreciate it. I think, Doctor, let's just start off with this South African scenarios 2030 and what kind of scenarios we are facing. Many say that we are heading to become a failed state. Many are saying we are already there. But what scenarios are we looking at, and what could possibly contribute to us becoming a failed state?
So I think the first thing is to say that South Africa is definitively not a failed state yet, but there are many indications that we are becoming increasingly fragile. And it sounds like, what's the difference between those two words, but they are quite significant. Fragility is about a much wider range of institutions within the society and not just the state. So the Indlulamiti scenarios to 2030 were developed in 2017, launched in 2018, and they put forward three possible directions the country could have gone from there. Gwara is what was called the worst case scenario. But we were also looking at Isibujwa, which was a sort of status quo of a very unequal but essentially largely stable society. And then Nailewok was a better, more productive, social cohesive state and society. What we have seen every year since 2018 through the Indlulamiti Barometer, which is launched every year at about June or July, is that the country has been sliding increasingly into indicators that look like the Gwara scenario. And now the value of this way of thinking about it in the scenario story is that there isn't only one direction we can go. There are other ways in which everyone in South Africa can imagine a different future and can take a different path. But we have not yet found the social compact and the level of cohesion required to actually make the choices to put us onto those higher paths.
Certainly. Prof, maybe I should bring you in here. I mean, interesting choice of words on the different scenarios, I must say. But I want us to maybe get your perspective, Prof, on this, because as Dr. Tara said now, we're not a failed state, but some South Africans would feel otherwise because of the many, many problems we face. And I think on top of mind currently is our economy and our unemployment rates. Would you say that we are a failed state, or would you say we are heading to that direction, especially because of the state of our economy? Of course, there are other factors, but this one being top of mind for many at this stage.
I think thank you for having me. A big part of our states have failed. So parts of the state has failed, but overall, there are pockets of the state, of course, that is working. So we can't actually say the total state has failed. But parts of the state, I mean, we know, some of our municipalities really are failed states. And there are parts of the country where the rule of law has totally broken down, and there is, a failed state maybe at the smaller level. And then there's some government departments, they may be getting government, money from the fiscus, but they are unable to do anything. So, even departments fail. So what we've seen is not a total failure of the whole state, but we have failure, across the state. So, where it's departments, where it's provinces, where it's municipalities, and where it is local villages and so on. So parts of the state actually has failed. Other parts of the state is of course working. So it's not a total failed state, but parts of the state has failed.
Yeah, parts of the state might be failing or have failed, and this could pose a very dangerous picture for where we are heading to. And I want us to speak about the parts that have failed. Dr. Tara, maybe we can speak about how many would say we have a leadership crisis in this country. We have corruption that it seems as though sometimes our ruling party does not actually tackle this head on, and it does not deal with this, and you don't see people in those orange overalls as many South Africans would want to see them. So I know there are many factors, but I want us to perhaps speak about an indicator such as leadership crisis, corruption, and how that is contributing to the kind of image and the kind of state we are in.
So, I mean, I think I completely agree with Prof. Gumede that there are particular parts of the state that have failed. And I think what you're talking about as well is that there's parts of governance which intersects with the state, but there's also a different level of the government, there's governance, that also are increasingly losing legitimacy or have completely lost legitimacy. And the effect that has on the everyday life of the citizen is really where I think the emphasis needs to be. And this is also what the barometer shows us every year. It has 3 different dimensions. So we do look at institutional capacity and leadership as one of the dimensions on the barometer. We also look at the perception of the general population, how much confidence is there in the government, in the state, and trust, absolutely. And then finally, we look at levels of social inequality. And that really, that final basis, social inequality, the everyday experience of the everyday South African, that is actually where South Africa performs the worst. And it's not just in comparison to ourselves, our own dreams of where we would be 25 years after democracy. It's not just about memories of how maybe some South Africans used to, have expectations of service delivery, whereas, of course, many South Africans have never experienced service delivery. But it's also comparison to equivalent countries around the world and to our immediate neighbors on the continent. We are actually significantly underperforming on many, many of those social indicators compared to countries that are much poorer than we are, and we really have no excuse for that.
I mean, imagine we are performing worse than countries that are much poorer than us. There's just no excuse for this. I'll go back to social ills because I think there's a lot that we can touch on there. Prof. Gumede, maybe we can bring you in here and speak about, again, our economy, unemployment, how unreliable Eskom is at this stage. And many would say that, why would people want to come to South Africa? Why would people want to stay in South Africa when we cannot even keep our lights on? And it plays a huge role in how we do things, how we, our businesses, healthcare, schooling. It impacts almost every single part of our lives. And you also have an unemployment rate that's never seen before. And many would say that the fact that over 65% of our youth don't have jobs contributes to us heading towards being a failed state.
I think the first thing just to say, as a country since 1994, we've actually declined year after year, whereas the competitors have actually done better year after year. So if you look at a curve, if we have to put it on a graph, and we look at, other countries that were perhaps at a similar level to us, say in 1994, and we look where they are and where we are, we've been on our way to a failed state, and other countries who were developing countries are, been marching upwards to become industrial and developed countries. And I think that really is the harsh reality. The second thing, just in terms of, I think, the power outages that we've seen from Eskom is almost, where we have one entity. If the entity would have been a country, if Eskom was a country, we could have said it was a failed state or close to a failed state, because power really is at the heart of an economy. So without power, a reliable power in the economy, we can't get at economic growth, we can't get new investment, we don't have the confidence, people with the skill set in the country leave to other countries, and so on. But I think it's also with power, with lack of power, what it does is, it's one of those sort of things that really breaks an economy. So, and why don't we have power? Because of corruption. So, governance failures leads to state failures. So because the ANC as a governing party has been so slow in dealing with corruption, is the main reason why we're on our way to a failed state. And it is important for ordinary supporters and members of the ANC to understand that unless the country and the governing party deals with corruption, we are going to get that failed state. It's not a luxury. You can't have development unless you deal with corruption. And maybe just to end off, just to say that if we look at the ANC as a governing party, if the ANC was like a government, well, the ANC is a government, of course, but the ANC, one could even argue, is a failed governing party. So if we can talk about a country as a failed state, actually, we can definitely say the ANC is a failed party in the context of the failed state, almost like the ANC. If the ANC was a state, it would be a failed state.
Certainly, and I think you touched on a very important point for those who go out and vote to use the opportunity to make a difference in their community. And Dr. Tara, maybe I can ask you about how important it is for government to tackle crime and gender-based violence. I think this is a topic that's very dear to my heart, and I think that our government doesn't actually understand what women and children go through in this country. And oftentimes, if you don't feel safe in your own country, where are you supposed to feel safe? If you don't feel safe in your own house, where are you supposed to feel safe? And, you hear the Minister of Police saying, we're doing all we can, we've set up various units, but many would say that that is the #1 contributor as to why people want to leave, because it just seems as though our government does not have a grip on crime and GBV in this country. And I'm sure that's one of the contributors to say we failed in this country when it comes to protecting our women and children and when it comes to crime.
So I think that's a very important point, is that a functioning state and a functioning society protects public spaces and it protects people in private spaces, because there are consequences for negative actions and because there are mechanisms of recourse and protection and safety. And yes, it is definitely a failure of the state. I completely agree with you. It is also a failure of society. And in fact, when you have a society where you expect the state to step in the private family and the private home, that's a failed society. We should be managing as families and as neighborhoods and as communities to massively increase the protection of everyone by everyone without the requirement of it ending up with the police. And we know that the police system, of course, is very, very ineffective at this, but it shouldn't even be getting there. So I think that is a point where we shouldn't be trying to point fingers. We should be looking at ourselves, every single one of us, very carefully, and wondering what every single person can do, as well as questioning why the state is not able to do more than it has.
Certainly. I want us to go back to Prof. Gumede. Perhaps we can touch on a point that Dr. Tara touched on earlier when it comes to social ills. They say that South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world, and you see it every day. I remember when I was covering the recent local government elections, you had people in Limpopo who found it very normal that they have never had a tap in their gardens, that they actually don't really remember when last they saw a tap because they have no running water. And you have governments saying, the Premier actually said it in that province, that service delivery is sometimes over-exaggerated. And I think with the recent local government elections, that has been exacerbated to say what service is actually being delivered to our people. Prof. Gumede.
Yes. I mean, to start off, when I said earlier on that the ANC is a failed party, if in their context, but governing parties are really important because if a party fails, then the state eventually fails, but also society fails. So, I mean, a really important part of governing, particularly a country like us that's deeply divided, we've got our historical legacies, inequality, high unemployment, our development problems. We need to govern our society also effectively. Now, often people think about, governing in the context of the government or the state, but it's also society. How do we rebuild society? Now, I think perhaps, I mean, to where you say in terms of where people accept service delivery failure now as just how things are. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, it's frightening that we've reached that level. But that is the truth. Unfortunately, where we are now. I think what is even perhaps more fearful or more frightening, I think, for society is that the ANC is a governing party. Perhaps doesn't have the quality people. They don't have the people to change things around, and there isn't also the ideas or even the energy is not there, or the imagination, because societies as complicated as us with our complicated problems needs imagination. It needs people. Firstly, we need quality leaders, but then we also need to imagine how to do things differently. We have to imagine, what kind of society, and then how does that one build that kind of society? Because often about rebuilding a state and rebuilding a society, one can't use the ready-made answers of the past. One can't even use the answers that one got when one grew up, or the answers that comes from one's culture or political parties. One has to look outside all of the accepted truths and knowledge to rebuild a broken society and a broken state like South Africa. So perhaps I think the thing that saved us from a fully failed state so far has been that there is capacity in the non-state. That has saved us. If, for example, we didn't have a good civil society, a good business or professional or a middle class society, so South Africa would actually have been broken down already, totally like Zimbabwe. So that is what has saved us, is the private sector and so on. So what we now need to do in order to fix this or reverse the slide towards a failed state and a failed society is to see how we can use the non-state resources in partnership with the state, and also in terms of with the ANC, how do we get the non-state to co-govern with the ANC in order to, to get us where we want to go? Because the ANC on its own won't be able to rescue the South African state, neither would it be able to rescue the South African society, because it doesn't have the capacity. So we have to build almost, an all of society approach to get us to a functioning state and a functioning society.
Certainly, I was actually going to have that be my last question, but let me pose that to you, Dr. Tara. I don't want this conversation to just be doom and gloom. I'm so tired of all the bad news and always being the bearer of bad news. But how do we move forward? How do we look at things that we can take forward and focus on to not have South Africa be a failed state, and to focus on things that are working, not necessarily neglect the things that aren't working, but try and put more energy in things that are working and that can contribute to us becoming a better state?
Certainly, and I completely concur with Prof. Gumede that a whole society approach really is the way to go. I think there are messages from the President saying that a social compact is something that at his level he would like to see, and he's committed to a 100-day program in that direction. I think a social compact is absolutely necessary. I don't think it's possible to put one together within 100 days and then say it's done. It's a much longer process, and it's a complex process. And I think the important warning also is as a state feels more and more fragile, there is a temptation to look for an easy way, an easy change, and a strong man, particularly a man, usually, who plays this role, right? Maybe in other countries this has been a military option. In South Africa this would not be the case, but there are other populist voices who say, we know how to fix it, it's easy, give me the power and I'll do it. That's not going to work. It's a very dangerous route that leads us faster towards failure. And in fact, the very slow feeling, somehow frustrating, muddling through of building a larger whole society compact, that really is the only hope. It's not an easy one-liner. It's not something you can tweet about very easily, but it is a very important part of what everybody in South Africa can be part of.
Certainly. Thank you both so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. I think it's such an important conversation. I wish we had more time for it, but my AP is going to start shouting in my ear. But thank you both so much for your time. That's Professor William Gumede, who is from Wits School of Governance, as well as Dr. Polzer Ngwato, who's the Research Director for Social Survey Africa.